How's it going? About 2 years ago, a friend of mine and I decided to make a film documentary about religion in Spartanburg. Long story short, that never quite panned out. But luckily, I was already interested in making comic books, also known as graphic novels, which are basically the same thing, but they sound more important. All the preparations I had made for the film translated over pretty easily. So for the past year, I've been working on a graphic novel religious documentary about religion in Spartanburg, interviewing people who have lived in the Spartanburg area and practice any one of 6 religions: Christianity, Judaism, Islam, Buddhism, Hinduism, or Wicca. But let me back up and tell you about when the project began. My friend, whose name is Nathan, had started a sort of a spiritual quest to find a religion that felt right to him. I was fascinated by this and went along with him to the local mosque. Right there. To be blunt, I was pretty nervous going to the mosque, which most people don't know exists in Spartanburg, mainly because I had this word burning in my mind, along with all the negative baggage that's been heaped on top of it over the years. My subconscious had absorbed a lot of propaganda, and that was hard to ignore. Of course, once I actually met some Muslims and talked to them, this bastardized cartoon that had been forming in my head was abandoned instantly. All it took for me to drop that caricatured representation of Muslims was to, surprise, surprise, actually meet a few in person. That was the start of the project. What if I just sit down and talk with people who fall under some of these broad religious labels? It really isn't a secret that unique individuals make up the different religions, but I think what we sometimes forget to do is to take people and the categories under which they fall and really connect them both in our minds. So I thought an easy way to do that might be to make a comic book with illustrated pages announcing religions. All the preconceived notions should naturally flood your mind the moment you see it, intentional or not. Then, on the following pages, I'll show people who practice that religion tell a small part of their story. Like this guy, Rayhan. I'm the guy on your right with the funny hair. You'll see me again. Here I'm asking him when and why his parents moved to the U.S. from India. It turns out they moved here 35 years ago because at the time the U.S. job market was better than India's. His mother got her degree, his father got his degree for microbiology in the U.S., and his mom completed her residency for med school in Chicago. Rayhan himself is in his first year of residency for internal medicine in North Carolina right now. Now that you've seen a few of these panels, I can go ahead and get this out of the way. When people hear the word comics, they sometimes get visions of superheroes or sci-fi, or they at least think fiction. But a picture's worth 1,000 words, and you can see here exactly what I'm going for. When I talked with Rayhan, we were sitting across from each other in a booth at a restaurant, and that's what's in these panels. Now, just to clarify, I'm no expert on religion. I'm sure anybody who's taken a Intro to World Religions course could school me any day of the week. But for this project, I have been researching each of these religions in turn to tell some of their history and philosophies. But the point is not to be some sort of definitive work on the subject. I'm leaving plenty of stuff out. The plot of the book is really just what it is. Some guy who's grown up in a southern county here in the heart of the Bible Belt wanders around the town finding people of different religious backgrounds to talk to him. And during those talks, something interesting I've noticed is that life within these religions can be surprisingly similar. Rayhan told me a little about his life growing up. He had a fairly strict household. No smoking or drinking, and they wouldn't watch any naughty things on television. In fact, if two people began making out on TV, they would all turn away. A girl I dated years and years and years ago from my old church had a similar household as Rayhan described. When I was over this girl's house, the only show we would watch was Seventh Heaven. Even better than that was the filter they had on their television. It blocked out the naughty words in Seventh Heaven. Like in this panel, the mother on the show is telling her children about the birds and the bees. When she got to the word sex, the sound automatically muted on the TV, and instead of that word, we were shown a caption that read, hugs. That's the day I learned to always wear a condom when having hugs. On to Judaism. When I visited the Spartanburg synagogue, it happened to be during a bar mitzvah. Afterwards, they served a bunch of food, and I met this awesome lady named Irene, who I swear to God looked exactly like Elaine from Seinfeld, so you can picture her. She actually saved me the trouble of introducing myself around, because as soon as I had told her about the project, she began excitedly grabbing anybody who walked by and telling them about it for me. I eventually interviewed both her and her son, which I don't have that illustrated just yet, who is 13 years old and very intelligent. Irene also introduced me to Ben. Ben's family moved to Spartanburg in the 50s, and his father was the Rabbi Stauber, I believe, when this synagogue right here, right off East Main Street, was being built in 1961. Ben was pretty adamant from the start that his story would be boring, mainly because there wasn't much controversy in it. See, his father was trained in Orthodox Judaism, so they wouldn't drive on the Sabbath. They had separate dishes for meat and dairy to keep kosher. And yet there were never any problems between Ben and his friends growing up. When they would come over to his house to play, once they knew the rules, they had no problems being respectful of the regulations in his house. And likewise, he would go over to their houses near Christmas to help decorate Christmas trees. He just explained to me that as children, instead of finding each other's different cultures intimidating or even threatening, they found them fun and entertaining, like a game. Wicca was a pretty tough religion to track down locally. After failing to find any Wiccans, I had to go on a sort of witch hunt. Eventually, I was lucky enough to be contacted by Cynthia and Cameron. They're a lesbian Wiccan couple here in Spartanburg. And this was by far the longest interview I've done, and also one, I think, where I've connected most to the people with whom I've talked. Here I'm asking Cynthia about how she came to practice Wicca. I'm going to start flying through these, so you got to pay attention. By the way, these vertical panels are examples of the more whimsical ways to illustrate these stories. I'm not just drawing two people at a booth the entire time. She told me about visiting a metaphysical bookstore in Atlanta and learning about tarot cards. Then, at a psychic fair, she came across a group of people standing in a circle around a priest and a priestess. They were performing some ritual she didn't quite understand. But as she told me, she saw something and felt something that rocked her world and decided she was home. She joined a coven called the Grove of the Unicorn, whose focus on a priestess with a subservient priest gave her a sense of female empowerment that she told me was very important to her at the time. Then Cameron, Cynthia's partner, told me a little about herself. She was raised Reformed Presbyterian, which she described as very restrictive on women. On top of that, she's a descendant of the charter members in a century-old church. I'm just going to quote her right off the page here. All that weight of history and tradition pressing down on you, and at the same time I was figuring out that I was gay as well as transgender. Then she told me about her first foray into paganism. Here she's talking about reading The Wind in the Willows as a child. In the chapter Piper at the Gates of Dawn, she first encountered Pan, the Greek god. And for her, even at that young age, there was an instant connection between Pan and Christ. I take the cue from Cameron to illustrate out this historical intersection between paganism and Christianity. Writers of the Romantic movement like Keats and Wordsworth helped Pan to gain popularity in the public consciousness in the 18th and 19th centuries. They saw Pan as a personification of the English countryside. This was in contrast to what they saw as the ugly and unhealthy industrial environment. Paganism was the countryside, mysterious and sublime. And since Christianity was seen as being civilized or civilization, Christianity was the industrial environment. But the most interesting part is that people back then did not necessarily separate paganism and Christianity. Pan wasn't the Antichrist. He was seen as more of a green Christ. The other side of the coin, if you will. This idea is in keeping with Cynthia and Cameron, who are actually both regularly attend church and consider themselves fully believing Christians. For the portion of the project about Christianity, I decided to make it about my own religious upbringing. Suffice to say, I grew up a Christian here in the heart of the Bible Belt. I don't have this part illustrated yet, but I do have a cover to this supposed graphic novel. The title is Unicorns. I've been trying to think of what some explanation for that, and you just come up with your own ideas. The full title is Unicorns, a sit-down and talkie beneath religion's canopy. The cover sort of illuminates my state of mind. See, I've realized looking back at my childhood that ever since I can remember, I've had a very real fear of hell. When I decided I was an atheist, those subconscious fears surfaced, and part of me felt very clearly that I was going to hell. This is a painting of a very strange-looking cross-section of a volcano. The Icelandic volcano Hekla has been said to be a gateway to hell, and that is me willingly diving headfirst into it. We have access to an abundance of knowledge about each other's cultures, and we're capable of instant communication across oceans, continents, nations, whatever. And yet, somehow, it seems we've managed to retain and even amplify our tendency to typecast each other. And then we believe these labels we place on ourselves. We believe them fiercely, with an almost religious fervor. Why? I think it's because the labels are neat and tidy, black and white. And as cliche as this sounds, in what is a rather untidy, chaotic, and gray world, simple labels and categories can be a source of comfort, even belonging. They give us good guys to root for and bad guys to hate. And individuals, like Rayhan, Cynthia Cameron, Irene, and Ben, can be reduced to something that comes with its own preconceived notions, wrapped up and ready to go. Whether or not those notions actually apply to people within said category seems to be neither here nor there. I guess my point with all this is to say, maybe we should try accepting and celebrating each other's differences, and at the same time acknowledge our important and inherent similarities. The end.